Hi, this is Nancy with Quilting with Nancy. Thank you very much for joining me today. We're going to work on a project that I finished a while ago, but I wasn't able to get the recordings done because my studio isn't quite big enough. So we have transported our studio to my second favorite place. There's my studio in my basement, and my second favorite place is Smith Owen Sewing Center. This is a shop that I teach at pretty regularly here in Grand Rapids. So it's on the north side of Grand Rapids. Their website is smithowensew.com. So if you want any information about when I may be teaching here, that's where you can find out where I'm teaching here locally in West Michigan. What we're going to work on today is a Bargello, but this is kind of a Bargello plus, I guess. So this is the project. So I'm calling this Barging Ahead, or at least Gina called it Barging Ahead, so that's what we're naming it. And the idea of this Bargello, like a traditional Bargello, is that the strips are going to change sizes, and that's what makes this Bargello have a little bit of movement. But before we get to that project, let me show you what a traditional Bargello would look like. So here is one that I've done. Now this is one that I did, I don't know, a couple of years ago, and there is a pattern for it. So the pattern is available on our website, www.quiltingwithnancy.com. And this particular pattern for the Easy Bargello is for 3 different Bargellos. This would be the one that I would call a wall hanging. So it's maybe, I don't know, 25 by 36, something like that. And you see here where the fabrics are all different. Every one of these columns has a different fabric, and it's going to be a little bit different when we're working on the new Bargello. So this is the small version from the pattern that we already have. This is the larger version. So this would be one that could be considered a large wall quilt or even a lap quilt if you wanted to. I don't have any borders on it so far, but you see the idea of how the strips are cut different widths to give the Bargello that movement that it has. Now the last one that I did with that pattern was kind of a special one. This was done with an ombre fabric. This was one of Sue Penn's ombre fabrics. Sue Penn is a designer for Free Spirit Fabrics. And with this was just one piece of fabric. So the fabric went from yellow and then changed and ended at blue. So with this Bargello, I actually just made the tube out of one piece of fabric, but then cut the different widths to have it give its movement. That is your basic Bargello. We're going to be working on the Barging Ahead Bargello, and this is done in some different techniques, maybe a little bit more complicated. So I could recommend to you that you try one of the simple Bargellos first. I find you that would be quite helpful. So if you want to maybe do that first, kind of get the idea of cutting the strip sets and putting things together, but then you'll be ready to tackle the Barging Ahead. When we come back, I'm going to show you a way to pick out your fabrics and then the cutting techniques that we use. For the Barging Ahead Bargello, you will need 10 fabrics, and they're used a little bit differently than in the traditional Bargello. In the traditional Bargello, there's going to be darks and lights. There really has to be some darks and lights for you to be able to really see the design moving. With the Barging Ahead, you're going to have darks and lights, but you're also going to have 2 colorways. So here we have what I would call the blue-green colorway, and then this would be the yellow-orange colorway. Now you did get to decide what colors you want, but you want to have for this particular design a really kind of bright standout-ish color for your little accent that's going around, and then these are the ones that are going to be a little bit more blendy. So for instance, here are some fabrics that I've chosen. All right, so if we're looking at the blue section, we can say, all right, these blues, they kind of, this one's got a little bit of green and this one's a little bit of green, then it goes into a blue and maybe then to the darker blue. And in this case, I'm ending on this fabric that has a dark blue, almost black background. and the little circles here have the blue in it. But then do you see the kind of peachy coral color? That's going to be my accent. And so that's when I could go into these other colors. So when these fabrics are together, you will truly see that the colors have changed. That's really important with any Bargello, that you have that high contrast. But with the Barging Ahead Bargello, you want to have your extra set, kind of your accent color, be something that's quite a bit different than your main color, so that you can really see it happening. Now, once you have chosen the fabrics, then you're going to start cutting them. So I want to talk to you just a little bit about my basic cutting technique, and we call this power cutting. So the first thing, oops, that fabric's not going to work because it's got a piece chunked out of it. So with this piece, this is my folding technique, and you can find my folding technique on the video channel anytime you want to remember how to do the folding. And then we need a ruler. So with my ruler, I'm going to take my ruler, and I've got a nice big 16.5-inch Omni grid here, and that's going to give me a lot of space to do my cutting. For this project, we are going to cut strips 2.5 inches. So first I'm going to line up my fabric, the double fold of my fabric, down here at the bottom on a horizontal line. So that is going straight. I need to square up this side. So here, just going to square up that edge. Now I can turn it around so I can start the power cutting. So the idea of power cutting is to add the strip widths together. So for this project, you're going to need quite a few strip widths of any of your fabrics, and they're all going to be 2.5. So if I look at it and I say 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5 plus 2.5, that's going to get me to 10. With this ruler, I can go all the way to 15, cutting them at 2.5 inches. So I'm just going to do 4 of them for now. So we're going to start with that straight edge that I had cut over on my right-hand side and spun around. And on that straight edge, I'm going to line it up at 10 inches. And then I'm very cautiously going to be sure that my top horizontal line is still running true, so that this is very, very square. So with power cutting, you start at 10, then you're going to slide your ruler over to 7.5, so we're making 2.5-inch cuts. Then slide it over one more time to the left, so now I will have 2, and then 1 more. So I'm going to slide this to 2.5, and then I will have 4 2.5-inch strips. Now in the book, it is going to tell you how many you need, but I wanted to cover just that basic cutting so that when you're making your cuts, you're making them very accurately. Everything is nice and straight. And for this Bargello, you do want to have full 42-inch lengths. With the smaller Bargellos, you can use fat quarters. With this one, you're going to want the full length. When we come back, we're going to sew some strips together and then show you some proper pressing to make this project very precise. So this is my new booklet. It shows you how to make the Barging Ahead quilt. And with that, there is going to be a lot of instructions on numbering your fabrics. So here is the whole chart that you will do for it's like kind of all laid out, kind of step by step. But the idea is that you want to start by numbering your fabric. So this is my little chart that I would always reference back going, all right, which fabric is number 6? And here I'll go, all right, this one is it. This is your map. You really need to make sure this is very well labeled and organized. And then you're going to do the same thing to your fabrics. So here's my number 1 fabrics, and the book will tell you approximately how many you need to cut, although you always might need to cut extras, you never know. And the number 2 fabric, 3, 4, 5, 6. And so I had my 2.5 inches, and all of my strip sets were labeled very, very clearly. Then you'll look in the book and it will have you do 3 different strip sets. So strip set 1, or A, will be fabrics 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Strip set B will be a little bit tricky because it will be there 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, and that can get confusing. So you've got to be sure you've got everything labeled. 1, 4, and then I know these are 5, 6, 7, and then 1 again. And then the last strip set, your strip set C, will have your 8, I'm sorry, let's put this one here, 8, 9, 10, and then 8. So this is my standing out colors, the colors that are going to stand out, and then these are the colors that are a little bit more blendy. All right, so I have my strip sets all made, but I want to show you just some basics on sewing strip sets together as accurately as possible. So here on my sewing machine, I've got the Performance Icon. This is one of the machines that Smith Owen sells. This happens to be the machine that I own also. With this machine, there's just so many bells and whistles on it. You can just do anything. I was really surprised when I found out I could sew sideways on this machine. That's a whole nother lesson in itself, right? So at the machine, I've got my regular foot on, but I'm going to be sure that my walking foot is engaged, because that will always make your strip sets feed through more evenly. And I have put my guidelines on. So these are the guidelines that I use. Each one of these packs comes with 6 of these little stickers that stick to the side of your foot. So with my foot down, I have laid the guideline right there, so it's laying right next to foot. This is going to make piecing the strips so much more accurate, okay? So then I'm going to take my ruler, raising the foot, I'll put it down, and now I can move my needle to the left or to the right. Now you can't see it moving, but from the middle I have moved my needle so that from the edge of the foot to the scant 1/4 inch line, that's where my needle is lined up. Now if you don't have a machine whose needle can move to the right or the left, Guidelines has a guide that you can use for that. So if you have any questions about that, just send me an email, quiltingwithnancy@gmail.com. So now I'm going to take 2 of the strip sets and show you how easy it is to sew these together when you have the guideline on. So there's a number 1 and there's a number 2. And I'm always going to put everything back into the stack so everything is always organized. You know, I'm not a very organized person, so this can be a little bit out of my comfort zone, staying this organized, but it's so important that you follow along with the book and you truly stay organized. So here at the machine, I'm going to take my 2 pieces, right sides together, and I do like to always start with the selvage edges together. I just find it makes everything make more sense if I have all my strips always starting with the selvage at the top. So I'm going to put those 2 together. I've got my machine set up with a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I have a 100% cotton 50 weight thread. Gonna work with my needle in the down. Whoops, push the wrong button. There we go, needle in the down. And so with these lined up, if I put my finger right kind of halfway on the guideline and halfway on the fabric, that will actually create a kind of a little tunnel that the fabric can just go right under. And what that does is it makes your seam allowance so much more accurate, because you're not having to just guess if you are lined up with the edge of your foot. Using the guidelines on the side will make it so that you are truly lined up with the edge of the foot. So I'm just going to finish up this strips right here, and I would sew them all together. I would probably do some chain piecing along the way, but doing my very best to stay organized. Once I get strips sewed together like this, I'm going to be maybe even labeling it. Strip number 1, strip number 2. You must stay organized. The other thing that you must do when you're making any Bargello is be very, very cautious that your strip sets are being pressed very straight and precisely. So we're going to go to the iron, and I'm going to show you how I do that. The pressing with the Bargello is very important that you be very precise and straight when you're doing the pressing. So I think it's so important. I'm actually going to demo how to do the pressing on these strips. And that might seem a little bit silly, but trust me, it can make all the difference. Accurate seam allowance and pressing mean everything when it comes to a quilt like this. Now down here I have the back side of a traditional Bargello I'm working on. So with the traditional Bargellos, you'll have your tubes, and one will be pressed in one direction and tube B will be pressed in another direction. So you're just always going up, down, up, down. That is not the case with this Bargello because the pieces will change. So here you'll see that I've got some pressed in, pressed in, pressed in. And it's important that you follow the pressing instructions. So here in the book, you can see the pressing instructions here. I've got for strip set A, and these little arrows tell you what you're going to be doing. You're going to be pressing strip set 1 down to strip set 2, strip set 3 down to strip set 4. All right, so keeping that in mind when I'm pressing. Love it when here at the shop, so I'm at Smith Owen, and they've got the big ironing boards like this with that little wool mat on it. Makes pressing so precise. Love using that, and I love that my shop actually has what I actually have at home. So I've got my number 2 fabric, so here I'm gonna show you. I've got them labeled again with some masking tape. All right, so this is 1 and this is 2. I need to press toward the number 2 fabric. So I'm going to start with the number 2 fabric on top. Always going to put the steam on my iron, lifting it as I'm moving, and I'm setting that seam, kind of flattening the whole thing out. Now I can pick up the top fabric, and I'll kind of like slightly finger press it, and I'm using the edge of the ironing board to make sure that the strip is straight. So here, again, with the steam on, I'm going to, whoops, it's pretty hot. I'm going to lift it up, and as I'm sewing, I kind of tip the iron up as I'm coming to my number 2 fabric strip, and this will make that seam be pressed toward the number 2. So whatever fabric, oops, got to keep it nice and straight, whatever fabric is on top, that's where the seam will go to. And so even with masking tape, you can iron right over top of it. So here's my number 1, number 2 strip with the seam pressed toward number 2. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the 3 and the 4. So here's my selvage edge, 3 and 4. I want to press the seam toward the 4. So lay it down with the number 4 strip on top. Use the edge of your iron to get your strip very, very straight. So first setting it, and I use steam for this. I'm just careful not to press and wiggle while the steam is on the fabric. Now with it lifted up, I can press this open. That's not done yet. When you're doing the pressing for a Bargello, because these pieces will be cut and kind of, you're going to be chopping this all up, I find it also very helpful to use some spray sizing. So I'm going to use, this is the container for the Magic Quilting and Crafting Spray, which is a wonderful spray sizing. Inside you'll see it's a little bit blue. That's because I had a gallon left of the Mary Ellen's. So I love the Mary Ellen's liquid, but I love this nozzle a lot more. So here I'm going to spray it. Oops, got to open her up. And I spray quite a bit. I want these to be pretty stiff when I'm done. The stiffer the fabric, the easier it will be to actually piece these all together. So you're going to take your time pressing these strip sets completely dry. So I've got my strip sets together where I've done them in pairs. So down here I've got my number 1, my number 2, my number 3, and number 4. And you'll notice that I've always tried to keep the selvage edge at the top. That will help so that you don't accidentally flip this around this way and suddenly, yeah, I've got 2 strip sets, but this would be 4 to 3. Whereas if you always keep your selvage edges together, you'll be able to keep straight going 1, 2, 3, 4. These have both been pressed to the even number, so this to 2 and this to 4. I would then take this, put these 2 together, sew this seam, and then looking in the book, I would know that I need to press that up to 2. So you will pay attention to the book. So this is what your segments are going to look like. This is segment A, and you can see that my seams are pressed in on the evens. Then as we go to set B, there's pressed in different ways, and the final set C with the colored ones is going to be pressed different. Now, I wish that the pressing that I had you do would be perfect every time. You'd never have to repress a seam. It just didn't work out that way. So as you're working on the project, and when we get together next time and we start putting the strip sets together, I will mention to you that there's sometimes you'll have to take, all right, now this seam needs to be repressed to the other side. So just keep that in mind. This pressing is going to take you about 80% there, but there will be seams that you'll have to flip the other way. So when we get together next time, we'll be taking these strip sets, cutting them into their segments, and I'll show you how you build this quilt a quadrant at a time. It's really very fun, and it's not as confusing as you may think it is. See you next time.